Today, FTX reaches a settlement with liquidators in the Bahamas. A court in Montenegro hits pause on Do Kwon's extradition. And the CEO of a new crypto exchange for banks called Rulematch explains how institutional interest in crypto grew in 2023. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Kate Rooney. Digital currencies in the green this morning as Bitcoin climbed back above $42,000 by noon Eastern. Ether also rising slightly, but still trading below $2,200. Solana, meanwhile, jumped to $73. All right, let's talk about some of the top stories. Do Kwon has successfully appealed his extradition from Montenegro. For now, the country's appellate court annulled a lower court decision that cleared the way for Do Kwon's U.S. extradition. The previous judge had failed to hear the defendant in relation to the U.S. extradition request, which the country's law requires. Now the case is being sent back to the court for retrial. Next up, FTX has reached a deal with liquidators in the Bahamas. The company announced a settlement to end the dispute over whether the company's U.S. bankruptcy took precedence over the Bahamian one. As part of the settlement, FTX says customers in both jurisdictions will be treated equally, and FTX.com's customers can pick whether they get their repayment from the Bahamian bankruptcy process or the U.S. bankruptcy process. FTX's CEO called the deal a, quote, critical milestone for FTX debtors. Last up, Bitcoin miner Marathon Digital just struck a multi-million-dollar deal to acquire U.S. mining sites. The company said on Tuesday it was acquiring two sites from Generate Capital, one in Texas and one in Nebraska, for $179 million. The deal would add nearly 400 megawatts of capacity to Marathon Digital's mining operations, which is about a 56% increase from its current capacity. The company's stock jumped 8% after that announcement. As of noon Eastern, Bitcoin miners are, of course, prepping for the halving next year, which will cut rewards for miners, and that could lead to more consolidation in the space, as only the biggest and most efficient miners could turn a profit. All right, for our main story, a new crypto exchange for banks just launched in Europe last week. Crypto World's Talia Kaplan spoke to the platform's CEO and founder about the new trading venue and how financial institutions have been integrating digital assets into their businesses this year.
Your crypto exchange for banks, which uses NASDAQ technology and is based in Switzerland, started trading Bitcoin and Ether last week. Can you take us through how this idea came about? Did you think that something like this was necessary because you believe we'll continue to see growing participation of traditional financial companies in digital assets?
I think what we really have seen in recent years is that actually, and sometimes this is a bit unnoticed by most, right? That a growing number of banks and securities firms have actually entered into the crypto market and play already a certain role. I think it certainly depends a bit on the jurisdiction, but particularly from a European perspective, there is quite a vibrant scene, and it was quite obvious for us to eventually really launch a trading venue and settlement venue where these regulated participants really find a perfect condition for their business.
I understand that right now you're only serving banks in certain jurisdictions, specifically in regions like the European Union, the UK, and Singapore. So do you have plans to expand to the US in the near future? What would it take for you to include institutional participants here in the US? If those applications for spot Bitcoin ETFs get approved, would that help influence your decision to potentially start offering your product to banks here in America?
We certainly look very much forward for the entire ecosystem for a potential spot ETF on Bitcoin, but I think it would not trigger immediately our ambition in this regard. I think in this point of time, we'll be very careful and before really making sure it would be ready and work with the regulators and so forth before we ever would dare to enter the US market. I think for the moment, we clearly focus, I think, more on the European context, our home market, Switzerland, and would see how in the future we would be ready to potentially engage also in other jurisdictions like the US.
So right now here in the US, there are several pending applications for spot Bitcoin ETFs before the SEC, which were filed by asset managers BlackRock, WisdomTree, Valkyrie, Fidelity, and more. Spot Bitcoin ETFs are already available in other regions, including Canada and parts of Europe. Industry experts believe spot Bitcoin ETFs could launch here in the US early next year. If those applications do in fact get approved, what do you think will happen to spot crypto markets?
It's an excellent question, and indeed something that we really are also eagerly awaiting. I think in our view, certainly the admission of a spot Bitcoin ETF in the US would quite trigger quite an influx and into Bitcoin, and quite a widened interest, particularly for the advisory market. And I think as a sign that the whole market is really maturing, it certainly would have also an impact on the spot market, we believe. And I think in this respect, particularly, I mean, of course, it's open how it is finally admitted, but when you think about this discussion, whether, let's say, the rather in-kind or in cash contribution will be the norm. So particularly if, let's say, a cash contribution really would be the model to go from the regulators, this certainly would also rather even more make it important to have spot venues that can really deal also with these types of transactions that, of course, regulated counterparties or serious intermediaries would require to facilitate also these type of transactions. I think we believe particularly market makers, authorized participants, and also ETF issuers really look for these type of venues like Rulematch, where really they would find the perfect environment for these type of spot transactions.
And what would the approval of spot Bitcoin ETFs here in the US mean for banks?
Yeah, it's again a good point. I mean, I think for at this point, certainly, I believe having an ETF makes it certainly easier for many banks, I think, to offer this to their clients. I think it's important here to distinguish a bit, let's say, those banks who are also already in a position to also offer cryptocurrency holdings to their clients directly, so without any securities wrapper, or whether the majority of banks really still requiring that or want to have the traditional route of really being able to offer it through such an ETF. Particularly those that the latter, I think, will of course heavily benefit from this. But at the same time, we believe again it would also strengthen the offering of banks that do already offer direct custody of Bitcoin. I think particularly here in Europe, we do have a growing number of banks that do offer also direct holdings, even offering custody services for their clients, right? And in this regard, we believe there is a bit of a dual track depending on the jurisdiction, but there is no doubt that the ETF would have a very positive benefit on the entire offering of cryptocurrencies by banks.
This past year, EDX Markets, the crypto exchange backed by several financial titans, including Charles Schwab, Fidelity, and Citadel, officially opened for trading. We also saw that signal of confidence from Wall Street with the wave of applications for spot Bitcoin ETFs here in the US. So do you think that momentum will continue into 2024 and that we'll continue to see interest in crypto from major financial institutions?
Absolutely. And I think to some extent, I think it will trigger. At the same time, I think it's also already reflecting the interest that is already here. We find it also, within the crypto space, we have usually the saying that a bear market is used to build out a tech, right? And we, of course, after the bear market, let's so to speak, in 22, this certainly has happened. At the same time, I would say this time also particularly regulated intermediaries, banks, securities firms, those who wanted to venture into crypto assets really have used the time. And so I think what we now see now towards the end of the year, you mentioned also the launch of EDX in US, or such as our venue here, I think are already some of the first fruits, I think, of these type of developments. And we will certainly see more to come in 24, as many banks and securities firms are actually planning to extend their offering into that space. So yes, I think 24 will be the year where we'll see much more engagement of banks and securities firms in crypto assets for sure.
And it certainly will be very interesting to see if that happens. But according to Goldman's trading desk, 2023 was the year that crypto markets became institutionalized, arguing that the institutionalization of the market was most evident in the derivatives market. Do you agree?
Absolutely. There's no doubt. And I think there's really certainly driven by the fact that we had some more certainty, specifically, let's say, in the US, when it comes to regulation on the derivatives markets, also with the futures that we have, of course, on these exchanges, while indeed the topic of the spot market and the lack of regulated and I would say dedicated spot venues really has been issues also been called out, for example, by the SEC chair. I think this certainly had a big influence on the regulated banks and securities firms to rather focus on derivatives. But I think at the same time, it really will be beneficial for the entire ecosystem if we really can strengthen the spot market. And I think one of the reasons why indeed we launched this marketplace is exactly to offer, a venue which is also fully focused on these topics of market integrity, only admitting regulated players, and also make sure that we really separate the functions between a trading venue, custody, and all other functions, not mixing those things between, let's say, a venue for trading and being a broker. And I think certainly in this respect, we believe when we have these type of infrastructures, you also have mentioned, for example, EDXM in the US, certainly also a very similar trajectory. I think these type of venues will certainly help to strengthen the spot market also for banks and securities firms.
All right, that's it for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow with a lot more. We'll see you then.